Ein Zayin Amud Aleph.
We're
We're around a third of the way down, right in the middle of the line. Tana Yavesh Bekazayas. So the Gemara starts here. There's a brisa. We were taught Yavesh. We're talking about what you can carry and the quantities of what you can carry out, what you're not allowed to carry out, where you would be held liable for carrying on Shabbos. So the Mishnah gave us a few different sizes for different items. This brisa says Yavesh, wine which is congealed, so now it's in a solid form rather than in a liquid form, bikazayas. The size to be held liable to, which is us to carry out on Shabbos, where you would be chayiv for carrying it on Shabbos, is a kazayas. And Rashi explains why kazayas, because a kazayas congealed is a revius, based on what the Mishnah says that you're not allowed to carry out. We said undiluted wine, the amount that you would need to make a full cup of diluted wine. We said a revius of diluted wine. So once again, the main thing is if you're carrying out the amount that would be a revius, a cup of wine, which is a revius, that's how much you need for the cup where the Gemara said of benching, Berchas Hamazon, you would be chayiv on Shabbos. So here, if the wine is congealed and became a solid form, it has to, in order to be chayiv, it has to be a kazayas.
Can it be reconstituted? Congealed?
Yes, Rashi says it could be. So Rashi says the meikara have be revius ubekarush revius. It doesn't really say this in Rashi, but I think it's mashma that it could be
reconstituted. And then it should be the same, not a revius. It should be less than revius because you can add 3 parts of water to it to bring it up, just like we did before. We talked about with the strong.
I don't know if it could gain the mass again, like to get back to a revius, but it could be. I think you could still use the congealed wine for something, but you can't redilute it.
You can't. Oh, you can't. Right. You can't mix it up and it becomes wine again.
Right. No. So Rashi points that out. It can't. Like when we were talking about the undiluted wine, we said you could even have a quarter of a revius because it's 3 parts water to 1 part undiluted wine. Here, Rashi says clearly, ubekarish revius shlema. You need to have the amount which is equivalent to a complete revius, not a quarter of a revius, where we said by the undiluted wine. Here, by congealed wine, you need to have the amount which is a kazayas, which is equal to a complete revius. I'm sorry?
Isn't this garbage? You can't do anything with this congealed wine.
I just asked him if you could reconstitute.
I think no. I think you could.
So it doesn't make any sense. It should be the same amount as the super strong wine.
I'm not sure. Maybe you can. What is the? I'm not sure what the. Does anybody talk about it in the commentaries in the art school? I'm not sure if you could reuse this wine. If you can't use the wine, then
it's just garbage like any other garbage.
But the Mishnah said that if you have liquids that are garbage that you spill out, you need a revius. So this, I'm not sure what the use over here is, but it's the solid form.
It says this is the congealed wine in its present state is not suitable for dilution.
Okay.
And therefore, one is liable only if it carries out a piece that can form a revius.
So it's not. You can't dilute.
If you added 3/4 water to it, or it wouldn't bring it back. It says.
So it wouldn't bring it back. So I guess we could compare it to what the Mishnah says, kol hashayfchen, anything that gets poured out. So it doesn't have any use, but it's the equivalent. It came from a revius of wine, so now it stands on a kazayas of congealed of solid mass.
Why wouldn't you be chayav for something less than that?
I'm sorry?
Why wouldn't you be chayav for something less?
It wouldn't be considered something chashav enough. We base it on what the normal use. So the normal use of a cup of wine would be a revius.
So you can carry things as long as they're up to a certain,
Yeah, that's what the Mishnah yesterday's Mishnah told us the minimum amounts where you would be held chayiv for carrying it on Shabbos.
Not the Rabbanan.
It's always aser. But when we say pater, we mean pater aval aser. You wouldn't be held responsible to bring a chatas if you did it for shegeg. Okay, so you have this congealed wine. So if you carry out a kazayas, that's when you would be chayiv for congealed wine. Divrei Rabbi Nassan. These are the words. This is the opinion. This is the shita of Rabbi Nassan. So Amar Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef says, Rabbi Nassan v'Rabbi Yosi v'Rabbi Yehuda amru davar echad. This Rabbi Nassan that we just mentioned, and we have another Amayra of Rabbi Yosi v'Rabbi Yehuda, it's a Tana. Rabbi Yosi v'Rabbi Yehuda amru davar echad are saying the same thing. So the Gemara is going to tell us who this Rabbi Yosi v'Rabbi Yehuda is, what he says. The Gemara says, Rav Nassan Hada Amran. Rav Nassan that we're comparing to Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Yehuda is this that we just said, the one that we just said, that it has to be a kazayas of congealed wine because that's equal to a revius. And Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Yehuda, what is this Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Yehuda that we're comparing Rav Nassan to? That is the Tanya, like we learned in a brisa, Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Shisha devarim mikulei beis Shammai umechumrei beis Hillel. So normally throughout Shas, beis Hillel is the one that's more lenient, and beis Shammai is the one that's more stringent. There are exceptions. There are several cases where beis Shammai is more lenient and beis Hillel is more stringent. So Rabbi Yehuda quotes 6 of them, and he says one of the ones that he quotes, one of the 6 is dam nevela, the blood of a carcass of an animal. Beis Shammai mitarin, Beis Shammai says is tahar, ubeis Hillel mitamin, Beis Hillel says is tameh. So now the flesh of a carcass is a kazayas of the flesh of a carcass is tameh. If you touch it, you become an avatuma. Okay, I think it's avatuma, but the blood is questionable whether or not it has the same status of the flesh. So Beis Shammai says, blood, you're tahar. If you touch the blood, you're tahar. But Beis Hillel says, if you touch the blood, you're tameh. How much? Amar Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. This is the Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda that we're talking about. We're saying it's the same as Rabbi Nassan. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda says, Afke shetamu Beis Hillel. Even when Beis Hillel said it's tameh for touching the blood of a carcass, nevela is an animal which was not slaughtered properly according to the halacha, or just died. Loi tamu so shetamu Beis Hillel loi tamu timu ella b'dam sheyesh by revius. The minimum amount that you'd be chayiv, or become tamei rather, is blood of a revius. Okay? Hayil, why? Hayil, since v'yachol likroish v'lamed al kazayas. Since it could congeal and become a kazayas, therefore you're chayiv for touching your tamei when, if you touch, you come in contact with a revius of blood from the carcass. Okay, so you see the same concept. This is what the Gemara is comparing. Rabbi Nassan says the congealed wine at a kazayas comes from a revius of liquid wine. Yosef Rabbi Yehuda is telling us that the blood, congealed blood, in order to become tamei, you have to have a revius of liquid blood, because when it's congealed, it would be a kazayas. And in order to become tamei, when it comes to touching a carcass of an animal, the flesh of a carcass of an animal, it's a kazayas, the size of an olive, right? So when it comes to blood, in its liquid form, in order to become tamei, you have to have a revius, because that congealed would be a kazayas. So you have the same concept. Rav Nassan and Rabbi Yehuda are saying that the liquid form of something liquid revius congeals to a kazayas, both the wine and the blood. Amar Abaya says, Amar Abaya, Dilma Lohi. No, perhaps you cannot compare the two, Rav Nassan and Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Nassan is talking about wine, Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda is talking about blood. And we can't compare the two. Why not? Adkan like Amar Rabbi Nassan. Rabbi Nassan would not. Rabbi Nassan would only say his halacha over here with regard to the wine, the boy revius, because in order to be held liable for carrying on Shabbos, you need to carry out a revius, right? Which we said yesterday is a couple of ounces, a revius of wine, and so that only applies ela biyayin, the kolish. It only would apply to wine which is thin. Okay, so one revius of wine which is thin could congeal to a kazayas. So if you want to measure congealed wine, it would be correct to say a kazayas. Aval bedam de samich, yeah, aval bedam de samich, blood which is thick, kazayas loy boy revius. Since the blood is thicker, you don't need a kazayas of congealed blood. Doesn't have to come from a revius of liquid blood.
But it's heavier.
It's heavier, right. So therefore, if you're trying to compare Rav Nassan to Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda and say it's the same thing by wine and blood, it's going to be, Abaya is suggesting that perhaps it's different. Rav Nassan, when he said his halacha that you could carry, you'll be chayav for carrying a kazayas of wine on Shabbos, because that comes from a revius, and ultimately you have to carry a revius in order to be chayav. That would only apply to wine, whereas blood, a kazayas of congealed blood, where it comes to blood, where you need to have a kazayas, you only need less than a revius.
Are we saying anything lach, which now becomes yavish, is basically in this shear of a kazayas?
Well, now Rabbi is telling us that no, because
I'm not saying that it immediately transfers from a revius to a kazayas, but ultimately the shear of a kazayas is what's used when it's yavish.
What's yavish?
When it's dry. Regardless of what amount you start
congealed.
with.
Here it's congealed, like something with mass.
Regardless of what amount you started with, if you end up with kazayas, that's going to be also.
Not necessarily. So here we have two things we're discussing: wine and blood. So for wine, with regard to Shabbos, ultimately what's going to make you chayiv is a revius.
Right.
Whereas dam from a carcass, from a nevela, you need a kazayas. So it's just working the opposite way. Rav Nassan's telling you that the kazayas comes from a revius, so you would be chayiv. Rabbi Yehuda is telling you that the blood of a revius, you're actually coming in contact with a revius of liquid blood. He's saying you'd be tamei because that's the same thing as coming in contact with a kazayas of solid, which would be like similar to the flesh of the carcass.
But if anything, it's more, not less. So you'd always be tamei anyways.
If anything, it's more, not less. What do you mean?
Because
These
blood is
might
thicker than wine.
be more than a
There's no question because
right. But it does, what Abai is saying is that according to Reb Nassan, just because he said by wine a revius equals a kazayas, it doesn't necessarily apply to dam. By blood, a kazayas of blood won't be a revius of blood because it's thicker. So you can't. It's not like Rabbi Sudley was saying. It's not like an equation, like a formula. Kazayas revius. It's not always across the board.
If you come in contact with a revi of blood,
yes,
for sure you're tamei because that's more than potentially a kazayas.
Right, but the point over here that Abai is trying to make is that you can't necessarily compare Reb Nassan to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, and the other way around also. We just said why Reb Nassan would only hold true by his halacha of wine on Shabbos. But if you take it the other way around, and from Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda's standpoint, let's see, inami, or you could say it the other way around. Adkan loika amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda hasam, until now. In other words, only over here. By Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, he only said his halacha regarding to what he was speaking about, which is a kezayis sagi leib revius. Ela b'dam d'samich. So Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda is talking about coming in contact with blood, not congealed, liquid form of blood. So he says that you need to have a revius in order to become tamei. So, and we understand that because a revius translates into a kazayas of congealed blood. But that would only apply to blood because it's samich, because it's thick. Avol yayin, the kolish, wine which is thinner, kazayas have a yoser revius. In order to get a kazayas, you'll need more than a revius. Okay? So therefore, if you're trying to apply it to Shabbos, carrying congealed wine on Shabbos, you'll be chayav for even carrying out less than a kazayas of congealed wine on Shabbos. So you cannot compare, Abai said you cannot compare Reb Nassan to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Wine on Shabbos and dam, blood with regard to Tumah, are two different things because of the way the Gemara just explained. Okay? Now the next thing the Mishnah said was the minimum amount to be chayav for carrying milk, chalav, on Shabbos is kedei gemia, enough to swallow, like one amount to swallow. Ibayelahu, the Gemara asks a question. Kedei gemia, interesting question. The rest of the DAF today is going to be really interesting. Ibayelahu, kedei gemia, do you spell it with an aleph, gemia, or gemia? The word swallow, is it gemia with an aleph or gemia with an ayin? So today that we pronounce aleph and ayin very much the same, it doesn't make so much of a difference. But in the Sephardi communities, the aleph and ayin are quite different.
In the time of the Gemara, everybody did it.
In the time of the Gemara, everybody did it. Yeah. The Sephardim hold on to
how much you swallow?
Doesn't. It's not a practical question.
It's just one to know spelling.
Yeah.
It's the spelling.
That's why they're a little different than your
When you
typical...
pronounce an ayin, though, you have to swallow as you do it.
Good point. Okay, so kedei gemia is
actually nasal.
Gemia with an aleph or gemia with an ayin. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, he brings a pasuk which says, Hagmi'ini nam at mayim mikadech. The pasuk says, let me swallow some water from your pitcher. Right? This is what Eliezer says to Rivka. So here we see Hagmi'ini talking about swallowing the water, and it's spelled with an aleph. So we have a proof from the pasuk that it's spelled with an aleph. Okay. Once we get onto the topic of how to spell certain words, we continue with that. Ibayelahu. The Gemara presents another question, another shaila. Gar'inin or gar'inin? The Mishnah here is still related to our Mishnah a little bit because we said when it comes to measuring food, to how much food you can carry out on Shabbos, you don't measure it together with the seeds. Okay? So here, the word garinin, is it spelt with an aleph, seeds, or garinin with an ayin? Amar Rava bar Ula says, he brings a pasuk. This pasuk is in Vayikra. It says, V'nigra me'erkecha. It's talking about the value of a field after Yovel. We won't go into the whole specifics of the pasuk, but we see clearly that the pasuk uses the word v'nigra, which means it's deducted from the value. So the word deducted, v'nigra, the value is less, is spelled with an ayin. So we compare it to here, to where we're discussing measuring the size of food. So the garinin, the seeds, are deducted off of the size of the food. So we spell it with an ayin. You see that it's spelled with an ayin. Ibayalahu. The Gemara presents another shaila, another question. Oimimais, oimimais. The translation of the word oimimais are coals that are losing its oomph. They're not as they're losing their heat. They're not okay. So is it spelled with an aleph, these coals, or with an ayin? Oimimais, oimimais. Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi says, he brings a pasuk to prove one way, and we'll see it says Arazim loy amamuhu began Elokim. In description of Gan Eden, it's describing the beautiful cedar trees, and they don't take away, it doesn't diminish the beauty from Hashem. I guess it means I don't know exactly what the pasuk is talking about, but from the context here, it says that it won't be diminished. The cedars won't diminish the beauty in the Gan Elokim. So you see that the word amamuhu, which translates as diminish, which would be like these coals that are diminishing in their heat, is spelled with an ayin. Ibayalahu. The Gemara presents another shaila. Me'amtzin Tanan oy me'amtzin with an ayin. Is it with an aleph or with an ayin? The Mishnah tells us that you're not allowed to close the eyelids of a mace, of somebody who dies on Shabbos. You're not allowed to close his eyes because he's muktzah. So is that word me'amtzin, closing the eyelids, is that spelled with an aleph or with an ayin? Amar Rav Chia bar Abba. Rav Chia bar Abba says, Amar Rav Yochanan, in the name of Rav Yochanan, it says in the pasuk, V'oitzim einav me're'ois b'ra. You should close your eyes from seeing bad. So you see, closing the eyes is spelled with an ayin, so that's how you spell it. Okay, done with the spelling lesson. Now, Tana Rabbanan, the Brisa says, Hamaitzi chalav shel behema kedei gemia. If you carry out milk of an animal, so I guess cow's milk, the amount to swallow, you'd be chayiv on Shabbos. Chalav shel isha, but the milk of a woman, the luban shel beitza, or the white of an egg white, kedei lita and b'mishipa. It has to, in order to be chayiv, you have to carry out enough to mix in, like we spoke about this yesterday also, to mix into the eye patch. They used to have like this remedy for an ointment. So they used to have this thing that they put on their eyes for medical reasons, and it was a little bit of like medicine could be mixed with many different liquids. We said yesterday water. Today we're mentioning that you could mix it with a woman's milk or the egg whites. So the very small amount that you need to mix with this ointment, that would be enough to make you chayiv for carrying that amount out on Shabbos. This Brisa continues this same teaching here and says, kilor, if you carry out the medicine itself, this mixture, this compound that you need to mix into the liquid for your eye, how much do you need to be chayiv for carrying that out on Shabbos? Kedei loshuf b'mayim, and enough to mix with the water, the amount that you need to mix with the water to create this ointment. Okay, you would be held liable for carrying on Shabbos. Boy Rav Ashi asks a question, Kedei Shifa or Kedei Achiza? Do you need the amount? I'm sorry? Oh, right, I'm sorry, thank you. Boy Rav Ashi, Kedei Shifa or Kedei Achiza v'Shifa? Do you need the amount to carry out on Shabbos just to smear on? Or do you need the amount you need a little bit more to be chayav because someone's going to get left onto your fingers when you're dealing with it, so you'll need a little bit more. So are you chayav for carrying on Shabbos if you have just the amount for your eye, or also the amount that will get left over on your fingers? And we don't have an answer. The Gemara says teku. We let this shaila wait until Eliyahu Hanavi comes. Okay. Devash kedei litein ala kasis. The Mishnah says honey. How much honey are you chayiv to carry on Shabbos? A small amount, enough to put on the blister, we said. And the Rashi and the Mishnah explained that we're talking about the blister on the back of the horse or camel because they carried a load and it used to irritate their skin. So if you have enough honey, Rashi also said it could be on an arm or a leg of a person.
What happened to Kezias? Why all these weird...
Why different sizes?
I mean, they start saying kazayas. Okay, it freezes. I understand. It becomes a liquid. So we went through a whole thing that that revius equals a kazayas.
Right. Because there the Mishnah gave us the size of a revius, so we said revius equals kazayas.
Right.
But the Mishnah, yesterday's Mishnah, the beginning of this parak told us different minimum sizes for different items. Sure. Here,
Benny, he'll help you, Benny. Benny, he'll help you.
Come here. We're up to DAF Ayin Zayin here. Here, why don't you sit right next to me so we can follow along?
Yeah, he has a seat. He likes to sit.
Oh, okay. Here. So we're up to, here we're on this side. Ahmed Bays. We're just about to start the Gemara right here.
Thank you ever so much.
Tana, right here. Devash Kedelite in our classes, okay?
Are we saying, Rabbi, that you couldn't smear honey on your legs and walk out the door with them?
No, that's not what we're saying. We have a different problem. You're not allowed to smear on Shabbos, but that's
let's say it was before Shabbos.
No. We're talking about carrying a small amount of honey.
But if it's attached to your legs.
That's okay. No, that's not. Yeah.
You can do whatever you want.
Yeah. No, but he wants to know about walking out with the honey applied to your skin. Is that called carrying? No, that's not what the Mishnah is talking about.
Okay.
The Mishnah is talking about carrying out a small amount of honey. So, how much honey would you be chayav for carrying?
So why are they talking about your legs?
It's just to give us
the amount.
The amount, right? Okay. So the amount that you need, they used to use it to put on a blister.
Got it.
So this is probably a very small amount of honey.
Right.
If you carry out the amount that it takes to smear on a blister on Shabbos, you would be chai. That's what the Mishnah said.
I got it.
So now the Gemara says, Tana kidei litein al pi kasis. The amount, in order to be chai for carrying out honey on Shabbos, you need to carry out the amount to put on the mouth, like on the head of the blister. That's what the Brisa says. Bari Rav Ashi asks on this teaching, al kasis apuma de kula, on the blister on the mouth of the
tip,
which is the tip, like right the head, the very tip of it. The kula kasis of the whole blister, oidilma, or perhaps amursa kama de kasis. No. Here, Bari Rav Ashi al kasis. When it says al kasis apuma de kula kasis, is it on the tip of the whole blister? Oidilma amursa kama de kasis. Just on the so the two choices here are
the face. The first one's
the face of it. Puma de kula kasis, on the face of the whole blister, or is it just on the very tip? Amursa kama de kasis, like on the highest point.
A drop or 2 drops?
Basically, that's the question. Is it like one little drop or 2 drops, right? And that would be lafuke hydrana deloi. In the second option, if it's just the very tip, it means excluding the whole red area or whatever, the whole area that's affected by this blister. So again, the Gemara does not have an answer to this question, and it says teku. Okay, now for the rest of this daf, I would suggest that you use 2 hands, one hand on the Gemara and one hand on Rashi, because these words are rather not common, and we'll need Rashi's help to go through it. Okay, so Amar Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda says, Amar Rav, in the name of Rav, Kol Masha Bara Hakadosh Baruch Hu Ba'olamai, everything that Hakadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed is He, created in this world. He did not create even one thing for nothing. Everything has a purpose. Let's see what these things are. Let me just find the place in Rashi here. Okay, shavlul, a slug, lekasis, it's for a blister. Okay, so that means if you have a blister, use a slug and it'll help you get healed. Bara shavlul lekasis, he created the slug for the blister. Bara zvuv, he created the fly, litzira, for a hornet or a wasp. So if you get a bee sting, use a fly.
Crush the fly.
Yeah, crush the fly and rub it on.
Good luck catching the fly.
Okay, yatush. So this is a mosquito. Lenachas, a gnat. Yeah. Since I never heard of a gnat, I'm going to say mosquito because that's what it's more similar to.
That's the one into Titus's brain.
That's right. That went into Titus's brain and grew to the size of a bird. But it's used here for a snake bite. That's what Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav. Okay. Nachash. The nachash has a good use. Lechafafis, for a boil. Rashi says chafafis is min shchin, a kind of a boil, yeah. Samamis is a spider. You use a spider la'akrev for the bite of a scorpion. So the Gemara wants a little more detail here. Heichi avidlei, how do you do it? What's the remedy? Ma'isi chada uchma v'chada chiyura. You bring one black spider and one white spider. V'shalki lahu, you cook it, and you make a mixture. V'shai filei, and then you rub it onto the bite from the scorpion.
If you're still alive.
If you're still alive, right?
Better beta scorpion.
What'd you say?
Better Hashem should not have made a scorpion.
Okay, but we said, do we have a use here for a scorpion?
Actually,
no.
The art scroll says it's for the boils he's talking about.
Is that so?
It says, what is the cure for the boils?
Let's see Rashi,
Snake.
1 second.
We use a snake. It says a black snake and a white snake.
Okay, Heichi Avid, let me just double check that. You might be right here. Samamis is iron of Elaz la'akriv v'shai. No, Rashi doesn't say here. So he's so I don't know. No, it could be right. If Art Scroll says it, he's probably right.
Snake is used for certain boils.
Samamis la'akriv v'nachash l'chafafis Heichi Avid. Okay, yeah. So the Bach does switch it around. You're right. It's based on the Bach. He switches around these two remedies. Nachash l'chafafis goes after Samamis la'akriv. So we're talking about the snake. So you bring a black snake and a white snake, cook it together, and rub it onto your boil. Rub it onto the boil. Okay. Oh, don't forget to cook it first. Tana Rabbanon, Chamisha Amos Hain. There are 5 fears. Amos Chalash Al Gibar, where the weak one causes the strong one to be in fear of it, and the Gemara will explain. Amos Mafgia Alari. Mafgia, Rashi says, is Chaya Ketana v'Koila Gadol v'Shomeya v'Yaresh Tehei Bari Beria Gedola Ubayreach. This Mafgia is a small animal, or at least a lot smaller than the lion, and it makes a lot of noise, and it scares the lion to the point where the lion thinks a big animal's coming at it, so it gets very scared. Rashi also says another pshat, or others say a pshat, that it's just very strong. It has very sharp teeth, so it can kill the lion. Jumps on its head. So you have this mafkia, which is smaller than the ari. It creates a fear on the lion. The next thing is number 2 of 5 is emas yitush al hapil. You have this what we translated as a mosquito causes a fear on the elephant. A lot smaller than the elephant, and it causes it to be in fear of it.
Trunk and it can't get
right. Rashi says nichnas lapil b'chaytme goes into its trunk, its nose. V'chein samamis la'akriv nichnas le'ba'aznai. We'll see. The next thing is samamis al akriv. Emas samamis al ha'akriv. The fear of the spider on the scorpion. Why is the scorpion afraid of the spider? Rashi says because it goes into its ear, and I guess it does damage. Emas sanunis al hanesher. The next thing is. Number 4 is sanunis. Sanunis, we said, is that the spider?
No, swallow.
No, that's the swallow. Right, I'm sorry. Sanunis is the swallow al hanesher on the eagle. So it's a smaller, not as strong bird, but it gets into, Rashi says, it gets into it wedges in under his wings and doesn't let him fly, doesn't let him lift his wings. Nechneses tachas kanfei hanesher, goes under the wings. Uma'akvay miprishes kanafov, he doesn't allow him to spread his wings. Okay, so that's why the eagle is afraid of this swallow. Emas kilbis, the last one the Gemara mentions here is Emas kilbis. Kilbis is a kind of fish, a smaller fish, al levyasan, on a very big fish. So Rashi says it's a small sheret. V'nichnas l'dog gadol be'oznei, goes to a big fish in its nose, so it's scared of it. I'm sorry. So I'm sorry. In its ear, right? I'm sorry. But there are some say in the nose. Ayin Barashbam, he says in the side over here. Okay. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav.
Where does a fish have an ear or a nose?
I don't know.
The Levyasan.
The Levyasan, I guess, does. Yeah, it's a very big fish.
Yeah? Maybe it's a gill.
Okay. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, my Kra, what is the pasuk for these interesting phenomena that the bigger one is afraid of the smaller one? Hamavlik shoyd al uz. The pasuk here in Amos says Hamavlik shoyd al uz. It means basically that the smaller one is afraid of the bigger one, or the smaller one triumphs over the stronger one, the weaker one over the stronger. Okay. Next Gemara. The Gemara says, Rabbi Zera, Ashkach Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Zera found Rabbi Yehuda, the Havikoya Pischa de Bechamua. Let me just find the place in Rashi because there's going to be some interesting words again. Here we are. Okay, Rav Zera found Rav Yehuda that he was standing on the doorway of the Beit Hamua of his father-in-law. V'chazya dehave b'dicha daite. He saw that he was in like a lightheaded mood. He was in an interesting mood. V'iboy minei kol chaloli alma, and if he would ask him anything that goes on in the world, havi amarle. He saw that Rav Yehuda was in the mood of answering anything, so he decided to try his luck. Amarle. He said to him, Rav Zera said to Rabbi Yehuda, "My time ize maskan bereisha. Why is it that always that goats always go ahead? They always walk in front. V'hadar imri, and then sheep follow along behind." Amarle, so he answered him, "Kibriyasei shalaylam." It's just like the way of the world, like the way the world was created. The bereisha chashaycha. First it was dark, v'hadar nahura, and then it became light. So you have the goat is usually darker in color, and sheep is lighter in color. So you have just like the way the world was created. Then he asked him another shayla. My time mahani mechasyan behani megalyan. How come these are covered and these are revealed? Meaning the area of the tail, like these have a tail covering their behind, and the other ones don't. The goat doesn't, and the sheep does. Hani de mechasinon minai. So he answered him. Amarle. He answered him. No, it doesn't say Amarle here. Hani de mechasinon minayu. These that we get covered from. In other words, the sheep, which we cover ourselves with clothing made of wool. So mechasyan. Hashem made them covered. V'hani de loy mechasinon minayu. These that we don't become covered from. We don't use goat to make clothing from. So megalyan. Hashem made them revealed, open, not covered. My time he asked him another shayla. My time a gamlo zutar genuvte. Why is the tail of a camel short? The answer is, he told him mishum the ochal kisi, because they eat thorns. Okay, and since they eat thorns, I think that they don't want the tail to get stuck in the thorns.
Right.
That's the way. Where's the Dal referencing here? The Aruch says basic. No, okay, yeah. So they have thorns in them. So you don't want the thorns getting in the tail. Okay. My time a tura aricha genuvte. Why does the ox have a long tail? So he answered him, Mishum the dire ba'agme, since it lives in the swampy areas, or it hangs out in the swamplands, uboy l'charchushe vaki. It needs to get rid of, wag its tail at the mosquitoes, to get rid of them.
Horses have the same.
So yeah.
We should have tails.
Yeah. My time, he asked him, my time karno de kamta rechicha. How come the horns of a locust, of these locusts are soft? So he answered him, Mishum the daira bechilfi, since they live near the willows, which have hard branches. So the ikasya nadya umis avra. If it's hard and if it damages the horn, which that's what the locust sees out of, it'll make them blind. Yeah, the antenna. So that's why Hashem made their horns soft. Interesting. The Amar Shmuel, Haiman the boy the lisme lekamsa. Shmuel said, whoever wants to blind a locust, lishlufinhu lekarne. You should remove its horn, and you'll make it blind. Okay.
These will just kill it.
Yeah, okay, you didn't want to kill it, you had a little bit of rachmanis on it. My time a high timra de tarnagolta madli le'ela. How come the eyelid of a chicken, or a rooster, what's the tarnagol is the rooster, how come the eyelids go up instead of down like all other creatures, or animals, or people? How come the eyelids go from bottom up, down up? The answer he gave him is the diary adafe. They rest, they sleep, or they stay on boards on these high up places. Rashi says diary adafe sha'ola b'leilos, at night they go up ala crushim on the beams. Kairos tzarich sheyala hatachlein ala elyon mipnei ha'ashan shelo yichanas be'enav. I'm continuing in the Gemara. V'iyayel katra misavra. If the smoke comes up to the high places, smoke could come up and damage their eyes, and therefore the eyelids need to go from bottom up. Okay, now the Gemara changes gears a little bit, and Rabbi Zera and Rabbi Yehuda's conversation changes to the translation of certain Aramaic words, commonly used words. We might not recognize a lot of them, but apparently in the time of they spoke this language, it was commonly used. Dasha, which is a door, he translated. Where did the word come from? Derech Sham. That's where the word Dasha, a door, comes from. Derech Sham. This is the way through. Darga, which is a ladder or stairs. Derech gag. It's the way to get to the roof. So that's where the word darga comes from. Derech gag. Matchulisa, which is a dip, like a dipping sauce. Rashi says davar shamatbilin boy, something that you dip into. Goin kutach or shar lifton, any dip that you use for your bread. Where does that word come from? If you chop up the word, you'll see it comes from masai tichla da. When is this going to finish? So in other words, it takes a long time to finish it. Masai tichla da. Rashi rather translates it as l'chashayichle ma noichal. When this finishes, what are we going to eat? In other words, we need the dip.
I can't eat the next part till you finish this part. So what are we
right.
going to be finished?
That's what Rashi says. Rashi says v'linera masai tichla da l'fi she'ena kala adman arach. Since it takes a long time to finish it, she'ena nechal ela ma'at ma'at, because you eat it a little bit, just a dipping sauce. It's not an actual. Okay, so that's where the word comes from.
So they give you the restaurant, you fill yourself up with
right, exactly. Besa, where does the word Besa come from? Ba va'esiv. Besa, which is a house. Ba va'esiv, come in and sit, like come live. Va'esiv ba, and live in it. Biksa, I think, Rashi says, Bayis Sarvakatan is a very small house. So where does it come from? Be'aksa, which is a narrow house. Comes from that's where the word comes from. Kufta is this. Rashi says machteshes. It's like a container which they measured wheat in. So kufta, it comes from koif v'siv. Turn it over and sit. Like tip it over and sit. In other words, you could use it as a chair if you turn it over. That's where the word comes from. Livni, the Aramaic word for bricks is livni. Where does that word come from? Livnei v'ni. It'll last. Something made of bricks will last for generations, like for your children's children. So it'll last for a long time. That's why the bricks are called livni. Hutza, which is a hutza, usually we find in the Gemara in Sukkah, we find it in Shabbos. Hutza comes from like a fence made of like twigs. So where does that word come from? In the Aramaic word chatzitza, like a separation. Chatzva, which is a barrel. Where does that come from? Shachaitzev mayim, because you gather water in it. Min hanohar, from the river. Kuza, Rashi says kuza is a very small earthenware keli, vessel. So why is it called kuza? Kazeh, like it's just like that. That's how Rashi says kazeh. Klaimar davar muat v'kal k'may zehu mahu. Like that's what it is. It's just small. Okay, shutisa. What's this shutisa? Shutisa, Rashi says, is a bad shel hadas, a branch of a myrtle, and they used to use it to dance in front of the kala, by a chasana, by a wedding. So where does it come from? Why do you call it shutisa? It comes from the word shtusa, because the person who dances with this branch looks like a fool. So that's how Rashi explains it. Shtusa, nireh hamarakit kishaita. The person who dances looks like a fool, so we call this branch shutisa. Mishichla, which is a big bucket that everybody, like a big bathtub or something, which everybody washes in. Everybody washes their hands and face from. That's this mishichla. So where does the word come from? Mashikula. Everybody washes from it. Mashkilta, the word mashkilta means like it's a nicer basin for washing. Where does that come from? Mashya kalsa asisa, like a kala, a bride, or somebody fancy, they wash from this. Mashya kalsa, that's where the kala washes from. Asisa, what's this asisa? Asisa here, I think Rashi says mortir, which is a mortar, like the chasirasa, comes from the word chasirasa. It's missing, it's hollowed out, so that's where you put the wheat in to crush it. Buchna is the how do they translate buchna in the art scroll? In the pestle, right. That's the thing that you bash it with. Boi v'achna, you hit it with it. You come and hit it with this buchna. That's where the word comes from. Levusha, clothing, right, like to be clothed. Loi busha, you won't have embarrassment from being undressed. So that's where the word levusha comes from. Loi busha. Glima, glima is another article of clothing.
Overcoat.
It's an overcoat, right? Shanasa boi kegoylem, because you look like a goylem, because you don't have any shape. It's just like a big piece of material on the outside. A coat doesn't show the shape of your body. So you look like a goylem, like a dummy. Gulsa is another kind of clothing, another article of clothing. Goli v'esiv. You have to reveal it, to pick it up to sit down. Puria, which is a bed, we have this in the Gemara many times. Sheparin v'ravin aleha. You multiply in a bed. That's where the man and woman cohabitate. So, bar zinka. Bar zinka means a pit which is dried up. So where does that word come from? Bar ze naki. It comes from the word bar ze naki. This pit is clean. It's clean. Sudra. The sudra is referring to the handkerchief that they wore on their head. Instead of we wear a yarmulke, like they wore a head covering. It comes from Soid Hashem Lireyav, like a fear of Hashem. Comes from Soid Hashem Lireyav. The secret is to fear Hashem. Apadna, the word apadna, which means a palace, like the doorway to a palace, he says it comes from apischodein, this doorway where everybody comes. Okay, Tana Rabbanan. The Rabbanan taught in a brayso shloisha, three different things, three different creatures. Kozman shemazkinin, as they get older, maisifin gvura, they gain in their strength, they become stronger. Ve'eluhain, these are they. Dog, a fish. Nachash is a snake. V'chazir, and a swine. They become stronger as they get older. Okay. Let's just do the next piece of Gemara. We'll finish off the daf here. Shemen kidei los. Should we go to the next? Should we finish this Gemara? Are we late? Or okay, yeah, finish it. Okay. The Mishnah said, Shemen kidei losuch eiver katan. How much oil are you chayav for carrying on Shabbos? If you have the small amount of carrying enough to smear on a small limb. Amri debei Rabbi Yanai. The Gemara says, they said in the school of Rabbi Yanai, Shemen kidei losuch eiver katan. Enough oil, you'd be chayiv if you carried out enough oil in order to smear on the small limb, shel katan ben yoimai, of a very small child, of an infant of 1 day old. So the amount of oil is minuscule, it's tiny. It's Rashi says that the small limb of a 1 day old baby basically means like one joint in a finger, between like very, very small amount of oil. Meisvei, the Gemara challenges this from a brayso, Shemen kidei lasuch eiver katan v'katan ben yaimai. The brayso says the amount of oil you need to be chayiv to carry on Shabbos is enough to smear on the small limb of and on a small child of 1 day old. It says eiver katan v'katan ben yaimai. So the brayso seems to be telling us two ways to measure the oil, either on a small limb or on a small child. So it must be that it doesn't mean my love, is it not? Aver katan de gadol, the aver gadol shall katan. Does it not mean the Bryce is telling us that you can measure the amount of oil either on an adult, a small limb of an adult, or on a big limb, the aver gadol shall katan ben yaimai, of a child of 1 day old, which would be similar in size. Like let's say the thigh, I think Rashi says the thigh of a baby, or like a smaller limb, maybe the finger of an adult. The Ever Gadol shall katan ben yaimai. That's what it would seem from the Brisa. Not like the Bey Rabbi Yanai are saying that it's the smallest limb, a small limb of a very small child. So Amri L'cha the Bey Yanai. What's the Bey Rabbi Yanai? What are they going to answer to this Brisa, which seems to contradict them, which seems to be not like that? No, that's not how we understand it. Hachikama. Rather, this is how to understand the Brisa. Shemen, enough oil you'll be chayiv to carry out on Shabbos. Shemen kidei lasuch Ever katan shel katan ben yaimai. So the way to understand the Brisa is, instead of saying Aver katan, a small limb, vit katan ben yaimai, and on the amount to put on a small child, it's a small limb of a small child, so a very small amount. They hold on to their shita, which is a very small limb, a very small amount of oil. So the Gemara says, okay, perhaps lema, let's say ketanoi. This is based on an earlier machlokes of Tanoim, which says shemen kidei lasuch Ever katan. Enough oil you'll be chayiv to carry out on Shabbos. Enough oil, enough to smear on a small limb. V'katan ben yaimai, and the amount to put on a very small child of 1 day old. Divrei Reb Shimon ben Elazar. These are the words of Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Reb Nassan argues and says kidei lasuch Ever katan, just enough to put on a small limb, which would indicate my lav b'hakam iflagi. Are they not arguing in this machlokes which we're discussing? Do Reb Shimon ben Elazar savar? Reb Shimon ben Elazar holds Ever katan shel katan, a small limb of a small child. Reb Nassan savar. Reb Nassan would hold Ever katan de gadol, a small limb of an adult. That should be the machlokes here. How much oil could they carry out on Shabbos? That's what it should depend on. Rav Nassan Savar, Aver Katan de Gadol, a small limb of an adult, Oy Aver Gadosh de Katan, which would be similar in size, or a big limb of a small child. Aval Aver Katan shall Katan ben Yoimai, the amount of oil to smear on a small limb of a small child, Loy, he would say no. So it would come out according to this machlokes. Rav Shimon ben Elazar says in order to be chayiv, you have to carry out a very small amount of oil, and according to Rav Nassan, it's a little bit bigger. And Gemara says no, it's not. You can't say that that's the machlokes. Loy. The kuli alma aver katan the katan ben yoimei loy. Everybody agrees that such a small amount, only enough to smear on a small limb of a 1-day-old child, is not enough. The Leisa the Rabbi Yanai. They don't agree with the way Rabbi Yanai is explaining it. The Hacha b'Hacha miflagi. The machlokes between Rav Shimon ben Elazar and Rav Nassan, it will be explained as follows. Rav Shimon ben Elazar holds Aver Katan de Gadol, a small limb of an adult. The Aver Gadol de Katan ben Yoimai, ki hadadi ninhu. And the small and a big limb of a small child of 1 day old are the same size. So a small limb of an adult and a big limb of a child is the same size. Reb Nassan argues and says, Savar Aver Katan de Gadol, in Aver Gadol de Katan ben Yoimai loy. He agrees that you'll be chayiv if you carry out enough to smear on a small limb of an adult, but if you carry out enough to smear on the big limb of a small child, no, then you're not chayiv. So must be Rav Nassan holds that those sizes are not the same. They're not similar. They're obviously different. And one you're chayiv for, one you're not chayiv for. So my havi Allah, what happens with this whole shiloh? We didn't come to a clear end. Tashema, we bring a brisa to tell us the Tanya. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, Shemen kidei lasach aver katan shel katan ben yoimai. At the end of the day, we found a brisa that says, where Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, you could smear, if you carry out enough oil to smear on a small limb of a small child of 1 day old, you'll be chayiv on Shabbos. Okay, that.